Hi, I'm Nora. Life in my family feels like walking on a tightrope, and every step comes with the risk of falling into the abyss of unspoken tensions. I share a house with my mother, my older brother Anthony, and his wife Riley. From the outside, we look like a picture-perfect family, a cozy home, polite smiles, and shared dinners. But if you peek behind the curtain, you'll see the fractures hidden beneath the surface. Anthony is the golden child. Always has been. The pride of our family, with his fancy degree and a high-paying job that my mother never stops bragging about to her friends. And Riley. She's his perfect match. A polished, poised woman who knows how to keep up appearances. But I see her for what she is. Behind her supportive facade, she's one of the reasons this house feels like a battleground of subtle jabs and silent accusations. And then there's me, the invisible one. I'm the one who stays home, managing the household expenses, taking care of my mother, and making sure everything runs smoothly. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary. Yet, no matter how much I contribute, my efforts go unnoticed. My mother doesn't hide her preference for Anthony. "Living with your brother and Riley seems better for me," she once said, as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. Those words cut deeper than she realized. I've lived here for years, sacrificed my independence to be her support system, and still, I'm overshadowed by Anthony's achievements. It's exhausting, being the family's backbone while feeling like an afterthought. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that strength is forged through adversity. I may not be the star in my family's narrative, but I know my worth. My second year at university was when everything changed. My father, the man who had quietly been my rock, fell seriously ill. His condition required constant care, and it became glaringly obvious that my mother couldn't handle it alone. She wasn't equipped for the realities of caregiving. We hired caregivers, but they couldn't be there all the time. So, it fell on me. I juggled my lectures and caregiving duties, rushing home in between classes to make sure my father was comfortable. The days were grueling, and the nights were sleepless. I would sit by his bedside, holding his hand, making sure he had what he needed. The balancing act was overwhelming. One day, as I was adjusting his blanket and making sure his medications were organized, a thought crossed my mind. How am I going to do this when I graduate? How will I keep caring for him once I'm supposed to be out there, building my career? That moment of uncertainty sparked a determination in me. I began exploring alternative ways to support myself and my family. I poured hours into studying online business models, using the principles I learned in my economics classes. Slowly, an idea took shape. I reached out to a few friends who had skills I didn't, management and tech. Together we launched a small online business. It wasn't much at first, but it was ours. While my friends worked from an office, I stayed home, running my part remotely so I could be near my father. The business grew steadily, and soon, I was making significant contributions to our household's finances. One evening, as I was helping my father with his medications, he took my hand in his and looked at me with a smile that reached his tired eyes. "Nora," he said softly, "you've sacrificed so much for this family. You've grown into a responsible, hardworking woman. I'm proud of you." His words hit me like a tidal wave of emotion. In a household where my efforts were often overlooked, his acknowledgement meant everything. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of his words, the validation I had been craving. I squeezed his hand gently, a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you, Dad." Despite the exhaustion and the endless juggling act, I knew I was doing the right thing. My father's recognition reminded me that my sacrifices weren't in vain. But the dynamic with Anthony, that was a whole different story. Anthony had always been the pride of our family. My mom couldn't stop singing his praises. The top-tier university degree, the high-paying job in the city, the picture-perfect life with Riley by his side. It was like his achievements validated her existence. But here's the thing. Anthony didn't give a damn about us. After he landed his prestigious job, he vanished. Calls went unanswered. Messages? Ignored. It was like we no longer existed in his world. At first, Dad tried to justify it. "He's probably busy with work," he'd say, even as hurt flickered in his eyes. But deep down, I think we both knew the truth. Anthony wasn't just busy, he was done with us. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Dad had sacrificed so much to put Anthony through school. Every penny went toward his tuition, making sure he had what he needed to succeed. And how did Anthony repay him? With silence. Meanwhile, I was the one who stayed, the one who rushed between classes and home, the one who sat by Dad's bedside, helping him with medications, making sure he was comfortable. And then, out of the blue, Anthony called. I still remember the way my heart jumped when I saw his name flash on my phone. Maybe he's coming back. Maybe he wants to reconnect. I answered quickly. Anthony? His tone was cold, businesslike. No, how are you? No, I've missed you. Just straight to the point. Nora, I need $99,000. I almost dropped the phone. What? For my wedding? Mom said it's a parent's duty to help their kids start their new life. I was stunned. After years of silence, this was the reason he reached out? Not to check on Dad? Not to see how we were holding up? He wanted money. What? I repeated, because honestly, I couldn't process it. Anthony sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. Look, it's not a big deal. You know I've got a lot on my plate, and Riley and I want to do this right. I was shaking with anger, but before I could say anything, I heard my mom in the background. It's his right as the eldest son, she said, her voice soft but insistent. That's when Dad, who had been listening quietly from his recliner, spoke up. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with disappointment. Why should we give him anything? He asked. He abandoned us, never checked in, and now he wants us to fund his wedding? Anthony must have heard him, because he went silent for a moment. Dad, Anthony started, but my father wasn't done. Nora has been here every day, supporting this family while you disappeared without a word, and now you want money? You don't deserve a single penny. I looked over at Dad, my heart swelling with gratitude. He had never been one for grand speeches, but his words hit hard. Anthony, though, he wasn't having it. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're being dramatic. And then, just like that, he hung up. The silence that followed was heavy. Dad leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and for the first time, he said what I think he'd been holding in for years. I'm disappointed in him, Nora, truly. Hearing that broke my heart. Anthony was supposed to be the one Dad could count on. Instead, he'd shattered that trust. That night, I stayed up late, sitting in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the ceiling. It hit me then. No matter what I did, I would always be the one in the shadows, while Anthony basked in the spotlight. But Dad saw me. He appreciated me. And that mattered more than anything. Things went quiet after that call. Anthony disappeared again, like he always did when things didn't go his way. I wish I could say I was surprised, but honestly, I wasn't. What did surprise me was how fast life changed after that. Dad's health took a turn for the worse. He'd always been strong in my eyes, even through the illness. But one morning, I went to check on him, and he was gone. I can't explain the panic that hit me. I shook him, called his name, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I called an ambulance, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing they could do. He was gone. The house felt unbearably quiet after that. The man who had been my rock, the only one who truly saw me, wasn't there anymore. And for the first time, I felt completely alone. I thought my mom would step up during this time, take charge of the funeral arrangements. But no, she spent her time scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. You handle it, Nora, she said casually, not even looking up. I'm too overwhelmed. Overwhelmed? Seriously? I clenched my jaw and did what I always did. I took care of things. I called the funeral home, organized the service, handled the paperwork. It was exhausting, but I wasn't about to let my dad down. The day of the funeral arrived, and I barely held it together. Seeing people come to pay their respects made everything feel real. The weight of my loss pressed down on me, but I stayed strong. Until Anthony walked in. He strolled into the funeral like it was some casual brunch, Riley clinging to his arm. They weren't dressed appropriately. Riley's flashy dress and Anthony's untucked shirt made it clear they hadn't put much thought into the occasion. And yet, my mom's face lit up when she saw them. "I'm glad you're here, Anthony," she said, her voice unusually cheerful given the circumstances. I watched, stunned, as she practically ignored everyone else and focused on him. But what she said next knocked the wind out of me. "Now we can discuss your father's inheritance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad's body wasn't even in the ground yet, and she was already talking about money. The room went dead silent. People started whispering, uncomfortable and confused. This wasn't a conversation meant for a funeral. Anthony, though, took the opportunity without hesitation. "To be honest, I don't think Nora should expect anything," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's been living off Dad all this time." The words hit me like a slap. I felt the sting of humiliation as heads turned to look at me. I wanted to scream, to yell at him for being so heartless, but instead, I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion," I said firmly, locking eyes with Anthony. "We're here to honor Dad, not argue about inheritance." Anthony scoffed, rolling his eyes, but my words must have hit a nerve because he didn't say anything else. Riley gave me her usual smug look, and my mom? She looked annoyed, like I had ruined her plans. After a few more tense moments, Anthony leaned in close to my mom and whispered something. Then, without even staying for the entire service, they both left. I watched them go, feeling a mix of sorrow and anger. This was supposed to be about Dad, a man who gave everything to his family, and they turned it into a petty argument over money. As I stood by my father's casket, I made a silent promise to him. "I'll honor you," I whispered. "No matter what they do, I'll carry your memory the right way." That day changed something inside me. I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of people who only saw me as a convenience. The time was coming to stand up for myself. The days after the funeral were a blur of paperwork and exhaustion. I barely slept, trying to sort out the legal mess my dad left behind. He'd done his best to put things in order before he passed, but there were still a million loose ends to tie up, and then, like clockwork, Anthony showed up again. This time, he wasn't alone. Riley strutted into the house as if she owned the place, her heels clicking against the floor, and Anthony followed behind, his arms crossed like he was ready for a fight. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, sipping on my third cup of coffee for the day. I didn't even bother to greet them. Anthony cleared his throat dramatically. "We need to talk." I looked up, raising an eyebrow. "About what?" He pulled out a chair and sat down, leaning forward like he was trying to intimidate me. Riley stood behind him, arms crossed, smirking. "This house," Anthony said. "It belongs to me." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "As Dad's eldest son, it's my birthright," he said like it was some royal decree. I let out a bitter laugh. "Your birthright? Really?" Anthony's face turned red, but he pressed on. "It's tradition. The eldest inherits the family home. You've been living here for free all these years. It's only fair that I take what's mine." I put my coffee cup down slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking with anger. "Let me make something very clear," I said. "This house doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to Mom either. Legally, it's mine." For the first time, Anthony looked genuinely shocked. "What?" I stood up, grabbing a folder from the table and pulling out the paperwork. "Dad transferred ownership to me before he passed," I explained. "He wanted to make sure I was secure. He knew I was the one taking care of him in this house." Anthony's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Riley, though, wasn't as speechless. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Why would he do that? You don't even have a real job. You've just been freeloading here." I clenched my fists. "Freeloading? Do you have any idea how much money I've poured into this house?" I snapped. "While you two were off living your best lives in the city, I was here. I paid the bills. I made sure Dad had everything he needed. I kept this house running." I glanced at my mom, who was sitting on the couch, avoiding my gaze. Her silence stung more than anything Anthony or Riley could say. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Let me remind you, Anthony, Dad's savings ran out long ago, thanks to Mom's spending habits. After that, I started giving $3,000 a month to keep this house afloat. Dad knew I was the only one he could rely on, which is why he put the house in my name. The room fell into an awkward silence. Anthony's face twisted with anger, and for a moment, I thought he might explode. That's not fair, he finally shouted. I'm the eldest. I deserve this house. Fair? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You abandoned us for years, Anthony. You didn't even bother to check in when Dad was sick. The only time you called was to ask for money. And now you think you deserve this house? Give me a break. Riley grabbed Anthony's arm, whispering something in his ear, but he shook her off. This is a betrayal, he said, his voice shaking with rage. We're family, Nora. You're supposed to share. I crossed my arms. Family? Don't talk to me about family. Family is supposed to be there for each other. You left. You don't get to come back and demand anything. My mom finally spoke up, her voice hesitant. Maybe we should share the house, she said quietly. It's what your father would have wanted. I shook my head. No, Mom. Dad wanted me to have this house because he trusted me. You and Anthony have shown nothing but selfishness. I'm done being taken advantage of. Anthony stood up, his fists clenched. You'll regret this, he spat before storming out, Riley close behind him. As the door slammed shut, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to stand my ground. This house wasn't just a property, it was a symbol of my father's trust and the years of sacrifice I'd made. I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. I looked at my mom, who still couldn't meet my eyes. I'm done, Mom, I said softly. I've given everything to this family. It's time I put myself first. Her silence said everything I needed to know, and in that moment, I knew this was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. After that showdown with Anthony, the house felt different, quieter, emptier. It wasn't the same home I'd grown up in, and honestly, I was tired of holding on to it. The walls carried too many memories, most of them painful. So, I made a decision. I was leaving. I stood in the living room, staring at the furniture, the photos on the walls, and all the things that once meant family to me. It felt like the end of something, and I wasn't sad about it. If anything, I felt relieved. That night I sat my mom down in the kitchen. She looked wary, like she already knew what was coming. I've had enough, I said, my voice steady. I've supported this family for years, and all I've gotten in return is disrespect. I'm done. I'm leaving this house, and I'm cutting all ties with you and Anthony. Her eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious, Nora. Where would you even go? I've been planning this for a long time, I replied. I'm selling the house and moving abroad. I have no intention of staying here, surrounded by people who only see me as a burden. She looked stunned, and for once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. But the house has been in our family for years, she said quietly, her voice trembling a bit. I met her gaze without flinching. It hasn't been our house for a long time, Mom. It became my house when Dad transferred ownership to me. He trusted me to take care of it, and now I'm making the decision to let it go. The silence hung heavy between us. Anthony's words replayed in my head. You'll regret this. But he was wrong. The only regret I had was not standing up for myself sooner. That evening, I started packing my things. Every item I folded into boxes felt like closing a chapter of my life. Memories of late nights by my dad's bedside, tense dinners with my mom and Anthony, and the countless times I felt invisible all flooded my mind. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up, balancing my studies and caregiving. I remembered the moments when I felt completely alone, holding everything together, while everyone else moved on with their lives. But those days were over. As I packed, I thought about my dad. I could still hear his voice in my mind, telling me how proud he was of me. That memory gave me the strength to keep going. A week later, the house was sold. My uncle, who had always been a quiet source of support, handled the sale for me. He didn't judge me for my decision. In fact, he encouraged it. "You deserve to be happy, Nora," he said when we finalized everything. "Your dad would want that." With the sale complete, I booked a one-way ticket to a tropical destination I'd always dreamed of visiting. It felt surreal, like I was finally stepping into a life that was mine. The day I locked the front door for the last time, I stood there for a moment taking it all in. This house had been my prison and my sanctuary. It held both my struggles and my growth. But now, it was time to walk away. I slipped the key into the mailbox for the new owners, took a deep breath, and walked to my car. As I drove away, I didn't look back. When the plane touched down in my new home, I felt the weight of everything I'd left behind start to lift. The warm breeze hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I rented a small apartment near the beach. Nothing fancy, but it had big windows that let in the sound of the waves. Every morning, I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise over the ocean. It was peaceful, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The first few weeks were an adjustment. I spent my days working on my online business, which was thriving more than ever. The financial freedom it gave me was something I never took for granted. And my afternoons, those were for me. I wandered through local markets, tried exotic foods, and chatted with the locals. Everyone here had a laid-back attitude, and it reminded me of something I'd forgotten along the way. Life didn't have to be a constant struggle. One evening, as I walked along the shoreline, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me here. The pain of my family's mistreatment was still there, buried deep, but it no longer controlled me. It didn't define who I was. I thought about Anthony and Riley, about my mother, and how things had crumbled for them after I left. News trickled in through my uncle, who kept a distant but watchful eye on them. It didn't take long for their lives to fall apart. Anthony and Riley had been living beyond their means for years. Without me quietly filling the financial gaps, it all caught up with them. They were evicted from their fancy apartment and ended up in a small, cramped place in the city. Their savings ran out fast, and they had to take part-time jobs just to keep the lights on. My mom? She struggled too. The debt collectors came knocking, and the shopping sprees she loved so much were a thing of the past. She wasn't the same woman who once walked around with an air of superiority. It was ironic, really. The people who had dismissed me, treated me like I was invisible, were now scrambling to survive. And me? I was thriving. But I didn't feel joy in their downfall. It wasn't some grand gotcha moment. If anything, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. I had offered them my support for years. I'd stayed when it would have been easier to leave, and when I finally walked away, I did so with no regrets. One afternoon, my uncle called. He'd been checking in every so often, making sure I was doing okay. This time, though, he had something else to say. "They asked about you," he said. I knew who he meant. "Anthony?" "And your mom," he added. "They wanted to know if you'd ever consider coming back." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "They're still clinging to the past." "They're struggling," my uncle said gently. But I told them the truth. "You've moved on." And I had. The thing is, forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciling. It doesn't mean going back to the people who hurt you. Forgiveness, for me, was letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the need for validation from people who would never give it. I stood on the balcony that night, staring out at the endless ocean, feeling the cool breeze on my skin. I was finally living the life I deserved. A life free from the weight of family drama, free from the constant need to prove my worth. I'd built something for myself, something solid and unshakable. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. The next morning, I took my coffee down to the beach, toes sinking into the warm sand as the waves gently rolled in. This was my life now. Peace. Freedom. Independence. I'd spent years sacrificing for people who never truly saw me, but in the end, I'd found someone who did. Me. As the sun rose higher in the sky, I smiled to myself, feeling the warmth of it on my face. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free, and for the first time in my life, I was happy. Story 2. I pushed open the thick wood door of Brooks's new office after taking a deep breath and smoothing down my skirt. The words Brooks Harley, President, were written on the door's plaque, new and shiny, only a week old. After using his computer, my husband looked up. He furrowed his brows in a determined frown. "Selena, I have a lot on my plate. What is it?" His voice was impatient. I flashed a folder and feigned a grin. "The staff meeting is scheduled to begin in 10 minutes, and the Henderson and Cal files are prepared for your consideration." Brooks waved his hand dismissively without raising his gaze. "Stop it, Brooks. I have more pressing matters to attend to," I said softly. "All week long, everyone has been working on their presentations. They anticipate your arrival. Cancel it," I said. His eyes, fixed on the screen, snapped. "That is not a request. It is a command." Feeling the pain of his tone, I bit my lip and nodded at the curtain before taking a step back and shutting the door. In the glass, I could see Brooks's reflection. He had already returned to his work, completely oblivious to the anguish his remarks had caused outside of his office. Leaning against the wall, I forced myself to relax. This was not the Brooks I had married. The man I had fell in love with had genuinely cared about his team and was enthusiastic about his career as an architect. With this new title, he appeared to be someone quite different. Chilly. Far away. It seemed as though the electricity had reached his skull directly. "Selena, is everything all right?" His father, Cruz Brooks, was eyeing me anxiously as I looked up. Despite his retirement, he continued to make frequent trips to the workplace. I stood up straight and made an effort to smile. Naturally, it was just a hectic morning. "Cruz, how are you?" He looked at my face, obviously not persuaded. "I'm all right. However, you ignore what my son has completed thus far." I paused, unsure whether to voice my anger or defend Brooks. "Really, it's nothing." Brooks is still getting used to his new position. Before I could reply, Cruz's eyes narrowed, either adapting or letting it go to his head. "Brooks." Out of his office, his voice roared. "Selena, those files are where?" I took the folder off my desk and gave Cruz a pitying look. "Duty calls." Brooks didn't even glance up when I walked back into his office. "At last. As you go, leave them there and shut the door." "The team truly needs you at this meeting, Brooks," I added, taking a big breath to regain my composure. "They have put forth a lot of effort." I was interrupted when he slapped his fist down on the desk. "God damn it, Selena. I'm now president. I choose what matters. Not you. No one else." "I understand." His shout shocked me, and I flinched. "All I'm trying to do is assist Brooks. Your father is particularly attached to this firm." I also assured him that I would. "My father is no longer in command." He cut off icily. "Yes, I am. And perhaps you shouldn't be here either if you can't manage it." I felt like I was slapped by his comments. I looked for the guy I loved in him, but all I saw was a stranger who was blinded by ego and power. "All right," I muttered. "I'm calling off the meeting." Brooks's phone buzzed as I turned to go. His voice changed to a pleasant, even endearing tone when he responded. "Juniper, sweetheart. Indeed. I am eagerly anticipating our business lunch. I'll see you shortly." On the doorknob, my hand froze. Juniper. I had never heard the name before, but the way he spoke it chilled me. Before he realized I was observing, I caught a cunning smirk on his face as I looked back. "What?" He lost his temper. "You have job to do, don't you?" With a mute nod, I left the office, my thoughts racing. When I informed that the meeting had been canceled, I was met with the dismayed expressions of our team members. The sinking dread that was developing inside of me was far worse than their obvious dissatisfaction. Why did Juniper make my husband grin like that? And who was she? For the first time, I felt a weight on my chest as I slumped into my chair. I came to the realization that this business and my marriage could be in trouble. We were all unprepared for the next morning. I was determined to pick up the pieces from yesterday, so I got to the workplace early. The tension was spoken to me as I moved past the main area. People stopped talking when I walked by. Awkward nods and forced smiles took their place. "Good morning, Zerlina." Asra, our lead designer, yelled. "Any updates on when the meetings will be rescheduled?" I paused, trying to think of the proper words. "I'm putting effort into it. Asra Brooks is yet to settle into his new position." Asra adjusted, raising her eyebrows. "Is that the new name for it?" Brooks's booming voice reverberated across the office before I could reply. "Selena." "Now my office." As I rushed to his door, I prepared myself. He was pacing back and forth and exuding annoyance. "What on earth is this?" He pushed a pile of documents into my grasp. I collapsed as I saw the top sheet. I feel sick to my stomach. The design team filed a formal complaint, citing Brooks's tardiness to crucial meetings and delays in project clearances. "They're simply frustrated, Brooks. Would it be possible for us to arrange a meeting to discuss their concerns?" He sneered. "I am not a childcare provider. I am a company owner. They are free to depart if they are unable to cope with the demand. But these are the people your father trusts the most, Brooks. They have years of experience with the organization." Anger caused his eyes to flush. "My father is no longer in command. I am. And a group of petulant designers will not challenge my authority." I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain a steady voice. "Please, Brooks, you're not like this. What's actually happening?" I briefly believed I glimpsed a flash of fragility, a glimpse of the ancient Brooks. Doubt, perhaps. But it was gone as fast as it had come. "Nothing's happening," he yelled. "Just keep them in line and do your job. Isn't that what I'm paying you for?" He was unaware of how much the remarks hurt. I was more than a worker. I was his wife and partner. But as I watched helplessly as the guy I loved seemed to go, I felt as though I was a stranger in my own life. I was his partner and wife. At least I believed I was. His phone chimed, catching Brooks's attention as I turned to exit his office. As he gazed at the TV, a cunning smirk appeared on his face. "I'm going to have lunch." Halfway out the door, he added, "Hold my calls." "We have a customer meeting at 1, though, Brooks," I reminded him. He said, "Reschedule it," without even stopping as he walked away down the hall. As I watched him go, my stomach knotted. This job was more than just hard. There was another thing happening. My heart sank back at my desk because of something. I make an effort to divert my attention by responding to emails and soothing clients who are irate over project delays. I calmed irate employees in an effort to prevent the team from disintegrating. I was emotional and tired by the middle of the afternoon, exhausted. I was startled by a soft knock on my cubicle. When I looked up, I saw Cruz with a worried expression on his face. "Do you have a moment, Selena?" I nodded, appreciating the respite. Cruz, with warm but inquisitive eyes, pulled up a chair across from me. "Things have been coming to me." He started out by gently discussing Brooks and his management of the business. I took a deep breath, not sure how to react. Cruz had dedicated his entire life to creating this business, believing Brooks would be its leader. How could I let him know that everything was unraveling? I started to say Cruz, but he stopped me with a hand gesture. "Selena, you don't have to keep him safe for me. For some time now, I've sensed that something is off." I only hoped he would get used to the position. Tears stabbed at my eyes. "I don't know what to do," I muttered. "He is pushing people away and won't listen to me." Cruz stretched across the desk, holding my hand. "We'll work this out, Selena, together. This firm, this family. It means everything to me. I can't stand by and let Brooks trash it." Just then, Brooks. His voice rang across the office, loud and furious. "Where the hell is everyone? We have job to do, don't we?" Cruz and I looked at each other. The storm was far from ended, but his words offered me a shard of hope. Together we'd find a way through. However, that hope vanished as I turned the corner and found Brooks standing there with his tie crooked and a hint of lipstick on his collar. I felt powerless to stop the man I'd once loved from drifting away. I drove home exhausted from yet another long day of dealing with the consequences of Brooks's actions. I just wanted a glass of wine and a nice bath. A gorgeous blonde emerged from the front door as I grabbed for my keys. She had hurriedly buttoned her blouse and smeared her lipstick. Her eyes widened with recognition, and she froze upon seeing me. "You must be Selena, I see." Quickly recovering, she said, I am Brooks's consultant, Juniper. As I took in her words, my entire world shook. The name Brooks called was Juniper, his collar's lipstick. With horrible clarity, everything fell into place. With Juniper's lips curving into a sneer, I managed to mutter, "Consultant," hardly raising my voice above a whisper. "Yes, indeed. I've been collaborating closely with Brooks. You know, he's quite the visionary." Brooks came into the doorway, his face white, before I could reply. "You're home early, Selena." He had the appearance of a deer in headlights. His face wavered between calculating and terror. He hurried her to her car and said that Juniper was just leaving. I was left alone with a man after they shared a knowing look and she drove away. All of a sudden, I felt completely ignorant. With my head spinning, I brushed by Brooks and entered the home. He was already making excuses as he followed me inside. "It's not what you think, Selena," he stumbled. "Just assisting with some new initiatives is what Juniper is doing. We were generating concepts for—" I turned to look at him. "Brooks, you have no right to lie to me. Not right now." His self-assured facade came off as he struggled. This is not what I intended to happen. It simply did. It simply occurred." I said it again, raising my voice, "Similar to how you simply occurred to overlook your work obligations. For example, you just occurred to treat our friends and staff like dirt." Brooks's expression grew stern. "You have no idea how much strain I'm under. My father left me with unrealistic expectations. By driving the business into the ground and having an affair, I'm doing the best I can." His face was lined with frustration as he turned away. "Look, things become more complex. However, I can resolve this. This is something we can resolve." I laughed resentfully. Brooks? We no longer exist. You ensured that?" I became aware of how profoundly I meant what I had spoken when the reality of it struck me. We used to have a marriage and a partnership. His decisions and my heedless commitment destroyed it. "Brooks." His phone rang and he glanced at it, a flash of remorse crossing his face. "Isn't that Juniper?" Silently, I said. He did not refute it. "Please allow me to explain, Selena," he begged. However, I had finished listening. "I'm done apologizing for him." I grabbed my keys and turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Brooks called after me. "Away from you," I said, voice firm. "I need to think." With tears clouding my eyes, I drove through the streets as they grew darker. How did this happen? My beloved man. The life that we had created together. Everything was falling apart, and I couldn't seem to keep it together. My phone rang and Cruz's name displayed on the screen. I hesitated, but responded. "Zerlina, are you all right?" He added, "You left the office so suddenly." His worry shattering the last of my determination, I let it all out. The instability at the company, Brooks, his affair, and the emptiness I felt within. Cruz listened without interjecting, and he spoke quietly once I was done. "Oh, I'm very sorry, Zerlina. I am solely to blame for this. I should never have placed Brooks under so much stress. I emphasize that it's not your fault. Brooks made his decisions. Maybe—" Cruz let out a sigh. "We must now create ours, nevertheless. Come over to my place. Together, we will solve this." I felt a peculiar calmness descend upon me as I headed into Cruz's neighborhood. The worst had occurred. Brooks's treachery was very visible. However, I wasn't alone myself. A glimmer of strength returned for the first time in months. I was prepared for whatever was ahead. No more excuses, no more heedless allegiance. It was time for me to defend myself and the business that had become my home. The next morning, I came into the workplace with my head held high, despite the murmurs and strange stares. After my chat with Cruz, I felt a fresh purpose. This wasn't simply about salvaging the firm. I was trying to save myself. I was prepared to battle for the job and life I was due. That I was his partner and wife. I believed I was, however. There was nothing that could have prepared me for what I saw as I turned the corner in the office. Brooks was standing directly in the center of the bullpen. He encircled Juniper's waist with his arm. She was wearing a shirt and pencil skirt that used to fit me. "Everyone, not so long ago. I want to introduce you to Juniper." With his voice resonating in the startled hush, Brooks declared, She will become a special consultant on our team. As I caught Brooks's stare, my heart raced. His face was difficult to read. I'm being challenged to respond and create a commotion in front of everyone. Juniper gave me a smug smile, obviously relishing her new position in the organization and, it seemed, in Brooks's life. The first person to speak was our lead designer, Azra. We already have a complete crew though, Mr. Harley. Zerlina too. Selena is going to be helping Juniper catch up. Without even glancing in my direction, Brooks cut me off with ease. Won't you, my love? I sensed that everyone was watching me. Some were filled with uneasy curiosity, while others were filled with sympathy. I forced a tight grin as I inhaled deeply. Naturally, I kept my voice just about steady. Welcome on board. Juniper. The remainder of the day was a blur of uncomfortable introductions and phony grins. I fled to my office and tried to concentrate on my job, but Brooks's treachery kept coming back to me. How had it all come crashing down so fast? I was pulled back to the present by a knock at my door. Cruz was the one. Anxiety carved his face. I just heard, Selena. Are you okay? I gave a headshake, refusing to cry. I'm not sure I can handle this any longer. Cruz. Brooks seems to be doing all in his power to harm me. Cruz's mouth clenched. This is far enough. A board meeting is being called in an emergency. Brooks. His behavior is just wrong. Brooks burst into the room, his face flushed with rage, before I could reply. Hey, Dad! What are you doing? He glared at Cruz and demanded. Now, this is my business. You cannot simply waltz in and be satisfied. Brooks was silenced by the boom of Cruz's voice. You have denigrated all of my creations. It's time for you to deal with the fallout. Brooks. He smirked defiantly as his eyes narrowed. Repercussions. I've only just begun. He took an envelope out of his jacket and tossed it onto my desk. Think of this as my first formal presidential act. With hands that were shaking, I took the envelope open. There were divorce documents inside that Brooks had already signed. I felt a wave of disbelief. Are you letting me go? Barely able to comprehend the betrayal, I muttered. Brooks, he laughed icily. It's firing. I'm releasing you from this position, Selena. From everything, even this marriage. Years of shared goals were reduced to a few sheets of legalese, and as I gazed down at the documents, I felt my entire world fall apart. Please, Brooks. Cruz's voice had a touch of desperation as he begged. Consider what you are doing. The foundation of our business has been Selena. Finally, everything will proceed without her. Brooks lost his temper. Dad, you have to face it. Your methods are no longer effective. I have huge ideas for the future with Juniper. A peculiar calmness swept over me while they argued. I glanced up at Brooks, this man dressed like my husband. After glancing down at the divorce papers, I decided at that very time. I'll sign, I said softly, interrupting their furious discussion. Both men came to a halt. Astonished? Brooks was the first to recover, his face displaying a triumphant grin. Selena, I knew you would see reason. Really, it's for the best. I looked him in the eye. My face. Research. Brooks, you're correct. Though not for the reasons you believe, it is for the best. I steadied my fingers and signed the documents. I felt a sudden weight lift off my shoulders as I did. I was tired of being a victim, even if Brooks had ruined our marriage. I give up. I stood up and made the announcement. With instant effect, Brooks's grin wavered. What? You can't just... I am. And I can. I cut you off. Brooks, good luck managing this business without me. You will require it. I held my head high as I left. Cruz called after me. I heard. Hold on, Zelina. I stopped and turned around. Cruz had a mix of pride and resolve in his eyes. His voice was firm as he stated, I have a proposition for you. One that may salvage this business and provide you with the new beginning you are due. I felt a glimmer of optimism for the first time in months. Later, with a warm mug of tea in my hands, I sat across from Cruz in his comfortable home office. Following the events of the previous few days, my mind was racing with many feelings. With a soft yet forceful tone, Selena Cruz opened. I would want you to join my nonprofit architectural trust and collaborate with me. Someone with your abilities and moral character is what we need. Startled, I blinked. But what about the business, Cruz? How about Brooks? Brooks made his decision. Cruz answered, his eyes a little melancholy. It's your turn to make yours now. My phone buzzed as I thought about his offer. Azure SOS sent the message. Everything is falling apart here. The place is being ran into the ground by Brooks and Juniper. Selena, you are needed. My heart hurt. In spite of everything, I still had a strong sense of loyalty to the business and the co-workers I had known for years. I need time to reflect, I informed Cruz. He gave a nod. Naturally. Don't take too long, though. Both of us are aware that Brooks won't spend time demolishing our work. I braced myself and went into the workplace one more time to collect my belongings the next morning. Tension permeated the air. While I was packing up my desk, whispered discussions ceased as I passed. With a worried expression on her face, Azure emerged from the doorway. Selena, I'm glad you are here. It's a catastrophe. Without considering the experience of Juniper's reassigning teams, Brooks canceled 3 significant initiatives. Customers are enraged. The weight of it all made me sigh. Azra, I no longer work here. Anything I can do is useless. Her gaze expanded. Are you heading out? However, what about us? How about the businesses? Brooks's voice roared from down the corridor before I could respond. What are you doing here, Selena? He barged into the space. Juniper was following him. She smirked. I responded calmly, not letting him scare me. I'm just gathering my belongings. Brooks's gaze grew strained. Excellent. You should go as quickly as possible. Juniper is perfectly competent of carrying out her duties. I couldn't contain my laughter. Is she? Is that the reason the staff is in disarray and clients are threatening to leave? Juniper took a step closer and dug into Brooks's arm with her neatly manicured nails. I'm doing a great job. I'll let you know. According to Brooks, I'm a natural. I stared at her, wrath mixed with sympathy. You certainly do, Juniper. I wish you luck. You will require it. Taking one last look around the workplace, I gathered my belongings and left Brooks and Juniper behind. I didn't turn around. The end of this chapter meant the beginning of a new one. I was on my way to the door. Cruz's offer kept coming back to me, giving me a sense of direction. I was prepared to face the future this time on my own terms, no matter what it brought. I saw Brooks, his face white and dejected, standing in the shadows at the room's edge. Juniper stood next to him, her arms folded, appearing indignant and out of place. However, they were now in the past, and my purpose was to create a new future. As many of you are aware, I gathered my strength and went on. For our business, the last 2 weeks have been difficult. We have seen major setbacks, and I am aware that you have all been apprehensive and frustrated. However, today is a fresh start. I stopped, allowing my eyes to wander over the room and meet those of people I knew, some with optimism, some with concern. These were my friends, my co-workers, and the folks who had supported my business through good times and bad. I thought they were entitled to openness and honesty. I will not mince words. My voice was solid as I said, our reputation has suffered and we have lost business, but we have a chance to rebuild together, to re-establish our identity and win back our partners' and clients' trust. I looked at Cruz, who was observing me with support and admiration. His unspoken encouragement gave me the strength to continue. We're going back to our origins. We'll put our ideals, honesty, equality, and regard for our clients and staff front and center again. I think we can return our business to its rightful place if we work hard, are open and honest, and are committed to quality. There was a ripple of agreement throughout the room. People's expressions relaxed a little when they started nodding. Changes will occur, I said. We will reorganize our projects, mend our client connections, and ensure that each team member feels acknowledged and appreciated. It won't be simple, but I think we can do amazing things if we work together. The room was still as I concluded, and then there was a round of applause. The group appeared revitalized and prepared to proceed. Instead of the relaxation I had anticipated, I had a stronger sense of purpose and a renewed dedication to both the organization and myself. Cruz came over to me after the meeting, his eyes glowing with approbation. Selena, you did great. To take charge, I couldn't have asked for a greater leader. Touched by his trust, I answered, Thank you, Cruz. Having your support means the world to me. He patted my shoulder and grinned. This business is in capable hands. I was about to go away when I noticed Brooks standing close by, observing me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. A mixture of wrath and remorse. Juniper was gone already. Unconcerned about the result, Brooks took the initiative. His face seemed tired. Zelina. His voice was low as he started. I had no idea how much I was discarding. How it all went so wrong is beyond me. I turned to face the man who used to be both my best friend and my companion. Brooks, I said in a firm voice. I made my decisions, and you made yours. We both need to move forward. Slowly, he nodded, realizing that there was no turning back now. I left the fragments of my past behind as I left the room, taking a strong step toward the future. It would be a difficult journey, but I was prepared, all set to take the lead, to create and live my life as I see fit. Knowing that I had the fortitude and will to face whatever came next made me feel entire again for the first time in a long time. There was no sign of Juniper, and I saw Brooks go toward the rear of the room, his face pale and tired. I inhaled deeply before speaking steadily to the room. We have lost customers. Yes, and we have encountered obstacles. I started looking into my coworkers' eyes. The skill, commitment, and vision that each of you contributes to your job, however, remain at the core of our organization. The audience echoed in agreement, so I continued by explaining our strategy for restoring consumer trust and bringing stability to our finances. I could see a glimmer of optimism returning to my coworkers' eyes, a hesitant conviction that we might make things better. Abruptly, Brooks's voice pierced the atmosphere like a blade. All of this is false, he yelled, rushing to the podium along the aisle. Zelina is attempting to snatch me away. She planned the whole thing to get rid of me. Around us, heads turned to watch him, and whispers and gasps broke out. I held on to the podium and tried not to panic. This isn't the place or time, Brooks. It's precisely the moment, he said. Anger made his cheeks flush. My own father turned against me because of you. The board was altered by you. You. That's sufficient. From the side of the stage, Cruz's voice roared. He put a steady hand on my shoulder and went ahead. You did this on yourself, Brooks. Your decisions and deeds. We are here because of that. Brooks's frantic eyes flitted from Cruz to me. Please, Dad. She must not be allowed to do this. This is the heritage of our family. Cruz stayed stiff, but his face softened. Son, the building's name isn't the only part of the heritage. It all comes down to honesty, diligence, and treating our clients and staff with respect. Zelina knows it's time for you to do the same. As everyone waited to see how this would turn out, a nervous hush descended upon the room. Brooks's confidence crumbled as his shoulders drooped. That's all then. I just left. I moved away from the podium and walked warily up to him. Brooks, it doesn't have to be the end. You can still find a place here, if you're prepared to repay it. I briefly believed I had a glimpse of the man I used to know, uncertain and vulnerable. But his face stiffened at the same instant. Zelina, I don't need your sympathy. Or yours, Father. I'll open my own business. I'll construct a larger structure. Better? You'll see. A startled hush followed him as he turned on his heel and marched out. Aware of the eyes observing me, I went back to the platform. This was the turning point that would determine both the company's destiny and my leadership style. I inhaled, examining myself. I am aware that it was challenging to observe. My voice was a little unsteady as I started. However, this business isn't about the ambition or ego of one individual. It's about all of us collaborating to produce something truly remarkable. I let my eyes to wander over my coworkers' features, some optimistic, some doubtful. I cannot guarantee that the path ahead will be simple. However, I can guarantee this. I will always act in the best interests of our business and the individuals that contribute to its success. A burden was lifted from my shoulders as I proceeded to outline our next course. I was finally able to lead on my own terms after Brooks's last attempt to discredit me failed. However, I noticed a glimmer of concern as I met Cruz's gaze, a reminder that although one chapter had come to an end, another was only getting started. Our resilience had yet to be put to the true test. It had been 6 months since that fatal meeting of the firm. I stood looking out at the metropolitan skyline from the window of my new workplace. Now the view is different. I observed the world from a different perspective, not just because I was in Cruz's charity trust building. I was startled out of my reverie by a tap on the door. Enter. When I called, Azra came in, her face sparkling with joy. You won't believe this, Zerlina. Henderson's project. We succeeded. A big smile came across my face. I had always wanted to make creative, socially conscious work, and the Henderson project was just that. That's incredible. Azra. The group must be ecstatic. Indeed they are. She gave a nod. You should also be aware of something else. She paused and inhaled deeply. Brooks has a companion. It's insolvent. This morning, they filed for Chapter 11. I wasn't prepared for how severely the news impacted me. A part of me had hoped that Brooks would find his way in spite of everything. What about Brooks? I asked quietly. Azra gave a headshake. He hasn't been seen in days. However, Juniper. She paused and gave me a doubtful look. She said that Brooks left her high and dry when she arrived here earlier in search of employment. I took in the news while sinking into my chair. As if called forth by my thoughts, the guy I had loved and made a life with was no longer there. Instead, a warning about how easily success can fall apart if it is founded on the wrong foundation had taken its place. Cruz showed up at the door. Gently, he continued. I heard the news. How are you doing? I forced a little grin. I'm all right. There is a lot to process. Cruz nodded, pride shining in his eyes. Selena, you've accomplished amazing things here. The projects are spearheading this new branch of the charity. You are transforming lives. We are transforming lives, I corrected him. Without your help, I could not have accomplished any of this. He smiled and waved away my appreciation. Selena, you accomplished this. You transformed a horrible circumstance into something lovely. It's a unique gift. As Cruz and Asher had gone, I was left to think on my own. I reflected on Brooks, our shared existence, and our former aspirations. I considered Juniper, who had nothing left after pursuing prestige. And I basically considered myself. The person I was at the start of it all, desperate to please, too scared to defend herself. Now that woman appeared to be unfamiliar. I was shocked to hear my phone buzz. The SMS came from an unidentified number. Asterisk. Brooks is here. Can we have a conversation? Asterisk. I glanced at the screen, my heart pounding. I would have leaped at the possibility 6 months ago. Right now, I inhaled deeply before typing my answer. Asterisk. I've moved on, Brooks, and I apologize. I wish you tranquility. Asterisk. I felt the final traces of my former existence fade away as I pushed submit, replaced with a feeling of clarity and finality. At that moment, my door was knocked on again. My group was prepared to begin the Henderson Project's brainstorming phase. I smiled and replied, "Come on in. Together, let's make something incredible." I was overcome with appreciation as we were all seated around the conference table, exchanging ideas. Not characterized by a relationship, but by being independent and surrounded by individuals who appreciated and respected me, this was where I belonged. Although the trip had been difficult, it had brought me to this point of self-discovery, strength, and purpose. Observing my team's excited faces, I was convinced that the best was still to come. Okay, I remarked as I grabbed a marker. Together, let's rethink the future. I came to the realization that this job, this life I had created from the ashes, was my actual happily ever after as we started to outline our goal. Not a happy conclusion, but something far more worthwhile. A fresh start made with my own hands and heart. It would not always be an easy path ahead. However, I was prepared for any difficulties that could arise, as I was now aware of the reality. No one else decided how valuable I was. It originated within, from the fortitude and tenacity I had found inside myself, and I understood it to be the biggest triumph of all.